Alright boys and girls, today's video is silly and stupid, purposefully, because I got a question sent to me on Discord that asked, Cody, what's the maximum amount of damage a player can cause in D&D 5e with just one spell? And being the absolute unapologetic math nerd that I am taking up the mantle today and crowning myself champion, because I have come up with the official, undisputable answer of the most damage possible with just a single spell with over 12 million damage for a single Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition spell in just one turn. Before we jump into the answer and how this incredible number is in fact possible, a few things to lay the groundwork. One, no magic items. So this would automatically exclude things like legendary scrolls, aka the Scroll of the Comet, mostly because that is a boring answer. Two, no wish spell, okay? We don't want anything with a gray area of, well, I would just drop a giant well from 5,000 feet up and no. Absolutely none of that. Three, the answer needs to be a single spell in 5e, not just a single round, and it needs to be in a single round. So no simulacrum chains that go on indefinitely. And four, everything has to be official, of course, so nothing third party. All right, with that groundwork, let's talk about all the little different things we need to look at and a bit on the process of elimination I did to get to the true highest damage possible with just that single 5e spell. Firstly, we'll need a spell, go figure. Then we'll need to look at classes and see if there's any bonuses we might be able to pick up there. Thirdly, we need to look for any racial bonuses that exist. After that, we need to make sure that we understand exactly, guys, exactly what is possible with the correct interpretation of any rules, including area of effect layouts, which we'll talk about more later. And finally, we need to hunt down the perfect, most efficient target possible for all of 5th edition. Okay, so let's skip the spell for now and quickly look at race and class. The first is easy and obvious with the class choice, as Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, unlike previous editions of the game, doesn't really care about what your class is when casting a spell as far as extra damage goes. A firebolt from an arcane trickster does the exact same damage as one from a wizard or a druid or a bard, except for one sorcerer subclass, the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, which gains elemental affinity at level 6. This allows us to add in our maxed out +5 charisma modifier to the spell if it is the right element. But the drawback is we can only do it to one single roll of the entire spell. So not much, okay? But it is important to get those little things right if we want to claim the crown here. Moving on to race, there's really only two things to look at, the Goblin and the Aasimar. The Aasimar, of course, has the Radiant Soul ability that might give us a small boost if we happen to use a spell that does deal radiant damage, and the Goblin can actually give us a small boost in damage as well to any spell with their ability Fury of the Small, so long as the target is larger than the Goblin, so medium or bigger. While both of these racial choices have chances to increase our damage, ultimately, neither one is going to help us, as you guys will soon see. Let's talk spell choice. And here there's really nothing to dispute or even comes close to the spell that will be at the core of our theory crafting engine, Meteor Swarm. So let's look at Meteor Swarm closely to make sure that we really fully understand what it will do. It's a 9th level spell, has a casting time of just one action, has a range of 1 mile, is instantaneous, and of course does both fire and bludgeoning damage. It reads, blazing orbs of fire plummet to the ground at 4 different points you can see within range. Each creature in a 40-foot radius sphere centered on each point you choose must make a dexterity saving throw. The sphere spreads around corners. A creature takes 20d6 fire damage and 20d6 bludgeoning damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. So a few things to reiterate there. 20d6 of fire and 20d6 of bludgeoning. It drops 4 separate AoEs. It has a radius of 40 feet. And a key thing here we need to keep in mind is that it reads, quote, plummets to the ground at 4 different points you can see. So there's a little nuance here with rules as written and rules as intended. For the sake of the argument, okay, I am going to interpret that specific description as the meteor must make contact with the ground, and that point you can see cannot be at a point in the air, particularly because of the comparison of that exact wording with the description of Fireball. Fireball, another large AoE spell, reads, a bright streak flashes from your pointing finger to a point you choose within range, and then blossoms with a low roar into an explosion of flame. So, while Fireball can be detonated in the middle of the air, Meteor Swarm very specifically reads, the orb of fire plummets to the ground, even though it continues to say at 4 different points you can see. And that not only is reason enough to rule that this spell in our theory crafting must contact the ground because of that difference, but there is also a logical component that we should follow here, okay? The orbs hit the ground and explodes. The points we need to choose for our 4 different points in this exercise should touch the ground. Now, the fourth part of this puzzle is making sure we truly understand the rules as given to us by the Dungeons & Dragons 5e team, because here's something a lot of people get wrong, and it's not their fault at all. The D&D 5e team has never truly given us spell templates for radius, and here's why that is important to understand. Because if you, like me, have played several past editions of Dungeons & Dragons, or even a little game called Pathfinder or Starfinder, you almost certainly are working off of bad info from those past editions, because those games do and have included spell templates for radius and cones, except the 5e team kind of changed them in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. In the Player's Handbook, or PHB, on page 204 and 205, we get this little image here of a gnome in front of a chalkboard and rules that specifically explain what a point of origin is. On the next page, we get rules for the sphere, but it's all really vague, okay? The Dungeon Master's Guide doesn't give us much more info than that either. However, in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, we get a fantastic clarification on page 86 that says, quote, if an area of effect is circular and covers at least half of a square, it does affect that square. This is the very special line that changed all of those old 3.5 and Pathfinder templates from this to this. And the main reason being that 5e uses a different method for calculating diagonal movement, a lot like 4th edition did. Now, I'm not going to get into all of that, but I've seen plenty of people using these older templates because, hey, that's the way they've always been. 5e is in fact super vague, and even when they printed out new diagrams for lines and cubes and cones in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, the sphere templates didn't get the same quality of treatment for our clarification. So I'm not throwing any stones or judging at you if you have been using these older templates, but as a little side note, the saddest part about all this, the worst part about all this template business, is that even if you Google image search 5e spell templates or 5e 40-foot radius, you immediately get flooded with literally incorrect information. So all the new players out there learning the game are just straight up being misinformed. So again, not throwing stones if you're using these old templates. Okay, so on the screen, we have the correct version of the template, not just in a 2D representation, but a user by the name of Chokfull has gone through the trouble of creating the absolute correct by the book radius templates with 3-dimensional calculations included in them. And I'm going to throw a link down to his Reddit post in the description so you can slide over there and give him that sweet, sweet Reddit karma and snag his work for yourself to use at your tables. And now, boys and girls, I'm proud to announce that I am officially showing the game of Minecraft on my channel. So I guess it's official, okay? I am officially a Minecraft channel now. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is take a little liberty with spacing and interpret them to be not just a 5x5 2D space on a map, but instead a 5x5x5 foot dimensional cube. There is nothing in the rules that says that this is a thing. But there's also nothing in the rules that says that this isn't a thing. And there is, at minimum, at least a small precedent set in D&D 5e for vertical height, as Wizards has created maps in the past that have utilized this spacing before, not to mention how 5e in the game interprets climb speed and fly and swim and magic items like boots of spider climbing. With all of that said, the first image here is of what a 2D version of a 40-foot radius spell would be. Next up, we can start to get a better understanding of how a radius sphere centered on a point would look, not along just the x-axis, but also the y and the z-axis. And finally, the third image here gives us a much more complete picture of which spaces would in fact be affected by each individual meteor impact once it hits the ground. However, as massive as that impact is, that doesn't tell us the entire picture. Why? Because that isn't a full sphere. The spell Meteor Swarm very specifically says, quote, the sphere spreads around corners. Taking that in mind, we can safely assume that not every battlefield would be perfectly flat. And even if we targeted, say, the top of a hill, we would get additional spaces that would be affected in a sphere, as you can see from these two separate images. So since we are going for the absolute crown here, we don't want to let any damage slip by. And to make sure that I don't have to argue with people about what is and isn't the ground, like targeting a loose brick on top of a building, or maybe even the top of a totem pole, which I'd be fine with as a dungeon master if I'm being honest, we're just going to go simple and basic. We're going to take a huge field and dig ourselves a massive hole straight down. However, we're going to leave one section of dirt and rocks, much like our very own smaller version of the natural rock pillars found in assorted places around the world. We're going to assume it's got to touch the bottom of the hole for physics, and that allows us to now take full advantage of our three-dimensional spheres. This image gives a little diagram of how the spell will spread around corners and give us the absolute maximum space to put our targets. So now we've only got the last piece of the puzzle in choosing that perfect target, and this should be easy to do. We need something with either fire or bludgeoning vulnerability, or both if we can find it. That's got to be obvious. Secondly, in order to take full advantage of our sphere, okay, we don't want to be stacking mobs, we really need something that can fly. Well, boys and girls, I present to you the Ice Mephit. The Ice Mephit has everything we need. It flies, so we can stack them and pack them into every little space of our devastating spell. It has not just fire vulnerability, but also bludgeoning vulnerability. So it's the perfect little Pokemon for our theory crafting. Now, we just got to do some quick math. Each half of our sphere will hold 1,088 5x5x5 spaces. But of course, we need to subtract at minimum 8 spaces of the ground we left as pillars in our holes for a grand total of 2,168 Ice Mephits, with each Ice Mephit taking a whopping 240 fire damage and 240 bludgeoning damage thanks to those beautiful vulnerabilities. That brings us to 1,040,640 damage per meteor strike. As we get to drop 4 of them, that brings us to 4,162,560 damage in total. Plus, let's not forget our additional 5 fire damage from our Draconic Bloodline, of course, doubled up for that vulnerability to another 10. I mean, it does count, so yeah, let's include it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You saw the thumbnail, and it said 12 million damage, and you're not wrong. Because as staggering as 4 million damage rules as written is, we can do even better. Because of a little table that we get from the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 251. You see, this table describes creature size and spacing, and it tells us that if a creature is tiny sized, we can fit not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 tiny creatures into every space. So we need a better target, and there just so happens to be a CR0 tiny construct from the wild beyond the Witchlight that not only flies, but also has a vulnerability to fire. So sleep well, all you pixies out there, and thank Chris Perkins for not giving you vulnerability to bludgeoning or fire damage. Okay, so now the new max damage for each of these constructs is down from 480 to 360 damage each. That's 240 fire and 120 bludgeoning damage. And so we take our 2,168 spaces and multiply it by a factor of 4 now for our extra tiny creatures in each space, giving us 8,672 targets in total, multiplied by 360 damage each, and we get 3,121,920 damage per meteor strike, multiplying that by a factor of 4 for each separate meteor, and finally adding in that extra 10 damage from Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, and we get a grand total for the most damage possible in a single spell of all of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, completely according to the rules, by the way, of 12,487,690 damage. I think it's safe to say that no one is going to be able to top that. And so for now, I will take my crown as the king of blasting tiny paper constructs to smithereens with giant rocks magically pulled from space and time with magic, which is ironic, I know, because normally paper does beat rock, right? Was today's video about anything practically useful at your D&D table? No, absolutely not. Well, maybe with the templates, but I had a lot of fun nerding out on Excel, so I apologize to absolutely no one. I am confident that no one here can top what I came up with today, but I have a little challenge. If we did open up all of the magic items, what's the highest possible damage you guys can come up with then? I'm still gonna put an embargo on using Scroll of the Comet, okay, because that is so boring. But maybe we should say anything else goes. So I'm not sure what I will do, but maybe I'll let someone do an intro or give away some free one-on-one time from my Patreon, or even just send one of you guys a book if you guys come up with a crazy awesome answer. But I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with and seeing if anyone can even top what I came up with under the first set of rules for this video. If you guys love role-playing games as much as I do, I would love to have you subscribe. I put out videos on DM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more awesome stuff just like this. So if that does sound like something you might be interested in, subscribe button right down there. Come join us. If you guys like what I do here, you want to support more content like this and snag some rewards for yourself, maybe hop in a one-on-one or even a game with me, welcomeadventures.com is the best place to do that. So I just want to say thank you to all of my incredible patrons. Thank you. Because you guys support me so much, I'm allowed to keep doing what I love doing. And so for that, I'm just so grateful. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.